Songs of Russia studio presents Mi-8, the most numerous helicopter in the world. In a career spanning more than half a century, the Mi-8 has earned the respect of pilots and technicians across the world. In civil and military service, this helicopter has time and again demonstrated its outstanding capabilities. The Mi-8 was designed in 1961 under the supervision of Mi-8, and today it still sets the standard for reliability and performance. The Magnificent 8, Episode 1, Step by Step. Mi-8's unique success story starts in the town of Zhukovsky, near Moscow. 1947, the Central Aerohydrodynamic Institute, TSAGI for short. Chief of the helicopter department is 38-year-old Doctor of Science Mi-8. At TSAGI, he starts to test his universal machine. It's a full-size test bench helicopter. It's virtually a complete helicopter. All it needs is a tail boom and a tail rotor, and they come soon after. By the autumn of 1947, the full-size helicopter mock-up is built and tested. The Soviet Government Commission gives its approval. 12th of December 1947, the decree of the Council of Ministers of the USSR is issued. It orders the establishment of the Experimental Design Bureau. Mi-8 is appointed as general designer. Thus is the Soviet Union's new Helicopter Design Bureau set up. The Bureau's very first helicopter is based on that full-size test bench machine. It's called GM-1, which stands for Mil Helicopter No. 1. Flight tests begin the next autumn, 1948. There are a lot of problems. 2 prototypes crash. Test pilot Matvey Baikalov dies in one of the crashes. The theory of helicopter flight seems clear, but the practice throws up scientific challenges and engineering problems for the designers. The tests are complete by the start of 1950. A decision is taken to build 15 pre-production machines. The helicopter gets a new name, Mi-1. This is the Mil Design Bureau's first success. In competition with the other Soviet helicopter design bureaus, the Mi-1 comes out on top. 15 new Mi-1s are built at the Moscow helicopter plant. In 1951, the aircraft takes part in the Tushino Air Parade. Soviet party leaders and the military are still doubtful about these new rotary wing aircraft. They couldn't understand what they'd do with these helicopters. Helicopters were a distraction, they said. An interesting flying machine, nothing more. But helicopters are winning support elsewhere. It's the summer of 1950. The war between North and South Korea has begun. The United States supports South Korea. During their combat missions, the Americans use helicopters as transport aircraft. As a result, the US troops are that much more mobile. Soviet leaders accept this as good evidence that they've underestimated this new type of aircraft. End of September 1951, a Kremlin meeting decides to accelerate work on Soviet helicopters. The Mil Design Bureau is tasked to develop a troop-carrying helicopter. The specifications call for the new helicopter to carry either 12 paratroops or up to 1.5 tons of military equipment. But they only give the Bureau a year to design the new helicopter. There's no room for error. The designers work 16-hour days and stay overnight in their offices. The Mil Design Bureau has now moved to Moscow from Zhukovsky. With the new helicopter design going on apace, the Mi-1 enters mass production urgently. It's to be built at several different factories. And that is the foundation for helicopter mass production in the Soviet Union. In April 1952, after only 7 months of work, the Mil Design Bureau presents its new rotary wing aircraft for flight testing. It's called VD-12. The abbreviation is Russian for 12-seater troop-carrying helicopter. VD-12 makes its maiden flight on the 3rd of June 1952 with test pilot Vsevolod Vinitsky at the controls. The VD-12 flight tests bring the designers a whole raft of new engineering problems. They have to find completely new solutions because it's the first big Mil helicopter. But solving the problems brings experience and expertise that will become invaluable in future projects. Working on this helicopter gave designers the experience that helped them build perfect helicopters like Mi-6, Mi-8, Mi-2 and Mi-10. VD-12, which became Mi-4, was a great leap forward in the Mil Bureau's success. The tests are complete in 1953 and the new Mi-4 goes into service. In a long career, the Mi-4 flew several roles, from attack helicopter to anti-submarine warfare. For decades, Mi-4 was the main helicopter type in the Soviet armed forces. It was also important for the national economy. As a transport helicopter, it played a significant part in reclaiming the hard-to-reach areas of Siberia and the Far East and the mountains of Asia, as well as in polar latitudes. Mi-4 was good at supporting oil extraction, geology, fisheries, and of course, search and rescue. For a while, it was the world's heaviest mass-production helicopter with a lifting capacity to match. They built this helicopter in enormous numbers. It was successful not just in the USSR, but in many other countries around the world. Yes, the Mi-4 was great, but the new era of gas turbine engines was emerging. Compared to piston engines, gas turbines are light, small, and fuel efficient. Just after Mi-4 went into mass production, the Mil Design Bureau started developing the new heavy transport VM-6 helicopter. VM stands for Mil helicopter, and 6 is its lifting capacity, 6 tons. The VM-6 was designed to meet ever-growing military transport requirements. Up till then, Mil helicopters had had piston engines. Now the designers decided to use gas turbine engines. By the early 50s, these jet engines had become common on fixed-wing aircraft, so the idea now was to adapt them for helicopters. But there were no Soviet-made helicopter gas turbine engines, so it was decided to modify fixed-wing engines for the new Mil helicopter. In summer of 1955, the new helicopter project was approved. It was called Mi-6. The new helicopter made its maiden flight on the 5th of June 1957, flown by the factory test pilot Rafael Caprillan. It was the biggest helicopter in the world. Maximum takeoff weight 40 tons, 33 meters long, and no less than 10 meters high. During development, the payload of the helicopter was increased from 6 to 12 tons. Some of the Mi-6 design features were unique. The huge gearbox transmitted the power of 2 gas turbine engines to the 5-bladed rotor. That was 35 meters in diameter. The all-metal blades had a completely new structure. Each one was a long beam with special flaps attached to it. There were hydraulic dampers for the main rotor head. That was a new departure for Soviet helicopters. Mi-6 had new navigation systems and a new automatic pilot. The Soviet Army became interested. In 1959, a decision was made to start Mi-6 mass production before the official tests were even complete. And when Mi-6 was in final development, Michael Mil came up with a proposal to replace the outdated Mi-1 and Mi-4 with new generation helicopters. New generation basically meant new gas turbine engines. Leading helicopter companies around the world were convinced that gas turbines were the future. Michael Mil was well aware that his design bureau had to keep up with new technologies. But the Soviet military didn't go along with that. They were happy with the helicopters they had, and they didn't want the mass production of them to stop. Michael Mil had a way round that problem. This wasn't a new helicopter at all, he suggested, just a modification of the old Mi-4. So that was the starting point for the development of the Mi-8 helicopter. Let's look at its key milestones. Since Michael Mil had decided to upgrade the Mi-4 rather than starting afresh, what he actually had to do was to replace one piston engine with two gas turbine engines. On paper, the replacement looked pretty simple. The power plant had to be moved onto the top of the cabin. The cockpit was expected to be moved forward. Now, none of this meant significant changes to the fuselage design. In fact, the layout of the modified helicopter and the operationally proven Mi-6 were not very different. But in practice, things weren't that easy. Michael Mil was hoping that the USSR would develop its own helicopter gas turbine engine. But no one was going to do that without funds. But even if the engine had been available, it would have needed new gearboxes, new shafts, and therefore a whole new fuselage layout as well. Therefore, the decision was taken to use one turbo engine designed by Alexander Ivchenko. But that wasn't a helicopter gas turbine engine. It was designed for Antonov fixed-wing aircraft. So using one engine did not require a significant design change. No changes had to be made to the main rotor, the tail rotor, gearbox, shafts, or the landing gear. That had been the initial idea for the two-engine version, but for the time being, they were going for the single-engine option. February 1958, the Council of Ministers of the USSR issues the decree to develop the one-engine version of the helicopter. It's to be called V-8. The main customer is the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Sometime later, the military joins the project too. Work starts, but a year and a half later, things change. September 1959, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev makes an official visit to the USA, where he gets a ride in the American S-58 presidential helicopter. Khrushchev is mightily impressed with his flight. He likes the luxurious interior. There are comfortable chairs and a writing desk. There's even a bar. This is a real VIP helicopter. When he gets home, Khrushchev orders the building of a similar helicopter. The US president is coming for a return visit, and Khrushchev wants to keep up his dignity. The VIP helicopter project is put in train. It's a modified Mi-4. Michael Mil himself flies in to show his leader the new toy. Khrushchev likes it very much. This is Michael Mil's chance. He assures Khrushchev that his design bureau can build an even better VIP helicopter. He means not just more comfortable, but safer as well. The thing is, though, better safety can only be achieved with a twin-engined helicopter. Nikita Khrushchev likes that idea. May 1960, the decision is made to build the twin-engine version of the V-8 helicopter. As a result of that decision, the engine design bureaus are tasked to develop the first Soviet helicopter gas turbine engine. The Sergei Izotov Design Bureau is particularly interested. A lot of engine design bureaus didn't want to have anything to do with helicopter gas turbines, but at the Izotov Bureau, they liked the idea. There's one reason why many bureaus don't want to develop these engines. A helicopter engine operates in very tough conditions: dust, mud, birds, icing, rain, snow, lots of vibration. There are so many problems, but Sergei Izotov recognized that this is a job with a future, and he was right. Nowadays, twin-engined helicopters have overtaken the single-engine ones everywhere. Mikhail Mil's plans are coming together. He's got everything he needs to start on a helicopter with 2 gas turbine engines. The hard work has started. They decide to build 5 prototypes. The first 2 will only have 1 engine. The other 3 will have 2 engines. Summer 1961, the first prototype of the V-8 helicopter is ready for testing. It's got 1 modified AI-24 aircraft gas turbine engine. The difference between this 1-engine version and the Mi-4 is the nose landing gear strut and the front and central fuselage sections. The main 4-blade rotor and swash plate, the tail rotor and tail boom are the same. First, the helicopter does tethered tests. Mikhail Mil keeps a close eye on the proceedings. 24th of June, the V-8 makes its maiden flight. The test pilot is Boris Zemkov. 2 weeks later, it flies in the Tushino Air Parade. Soon after the parade, the V-8 flies to the National Economy Achievement Exhibition. It sparks a lot of interest at the show. These days, we'd call it an advanced technology demonstrator. Big passenger cabin, good visibility from the cockpit, and ease of maintenance are the new features that no other Soviet helicopter has at this stage. Autumn 1961, the second helicopter for ground tests is built. It's still got aircraft gas turbine engines because the special helicopter engines are still under development. A long-awaited moment comes in the summer of 1962. The first helicopter gas turbine engines arrive from the Izotov Design Bureau. This is an outstanding event in Soviet helicopter history. For the first time, a helicopter gets a specifically designed gas turbine engine. The new engine is designated TV2117. This is the one used in the twin-engined helicopter version, which becomes the Mi-8. Much of the Mi-8's subsequent success is due to this engine. If there's a good engine, you've got a helicopter. No engine, no helicopter. But it's not because the engine is the most important component of the helicopter, no. The engine is the core around which a helicopter forms. It's like a little crystal which eventually forms a shiny diamond. The engine parameters dictate terms to the helicopter designer. The engine figures were extraordinary. At takeoff setting, it produced 1,500 shaft horsepower from a dry weight of only 334 kilos. That was 250 horsepower more than the technical requirement. This increased power means that the main gearbox and the shafts have to be beefed up. That job also gets done by the Izotov Design Bureau. At that time, the gearboxes were developed by the engine company, not the airframe maker. The helicopter gearbox was so complicated it needed pinpoint accuracy in production. It's a unique mechanism which deserves a topic in its own right. I think that Izotov and Mil were men of genius. They always worked in very close cooperation. One developed the TV2 engine and the VR8 gearbox, the other, the Mi-8 itself. Their work made this helicopter a bestseller, and it's been produced for many decades since. Once the engines had been delivered to Mil, it takes only a couple of months to get the 2-engine helicopter built. The single aircraft engine is replaced with the 2 new helicopter engines. The helicopter is designated V-8A. 2nd of August 1962, the V-8A makes its maiden flight, flown by Nikolai Lyushin and his crew. The next month, Mi-8 flies for Nikita Khrushchev and the leaders of some other socialist countries. It's highly praised all round. Spring 1963, factory tests complete. All the while, airframe and engines are being continually developed. The third version incorporates all the changes to date. This is to be a troop carrier for the military. Mil and military are working together. This mock-up is used to test ways of loading and securing combat equipment in the cargo cabin. Seating arrangements are tried out. Then it's time for more flight tests. The main rotor has been modified to reduce vibration. They've added an extra blade so that the load is distributed among 5 blades instead of 4. They've also changed the fuselage. The cockpit side doors have become slide blisters. And the cargo cabin also gets a sliding door. The fourth helicopter is the VIP version. The fifth becomes a mass production prototype for the passenger helicopter. All these improvements make it a different helicopter from what it started as. The tests and the associated work only take 3 years. Compared to its predecessors, the new helicopter is very advanced and reliable. Well, to put it bluntly, this new helicopter wasn't a modified Mi-4 at all. It was completely new, with very little in common with the Mi-4. November 1964, joint tests complete. The Soviet government commission orders mass production to start. Depending on the customer's requirement, military transport, VIP, or passenger carrier can be assembled. As soon as the mass production begins, it gets a new official name, the MIL Mi-8 helicopter. Production starts at the Kazan aviation plant where the Mi-4 was assembled. The Mi-8 military transport version has round windows for better structural strength. By the end of 1965, the first mass production Mi-8s are rolling out of the Kazan plant. The MIL Mi-8 was designed in the mid-60s. Nearly 5 decades later, it's still one of the best helicopters in its class. There are several reasons for this ongoing success over the years. First, it's the airframe design. So good, it accepted modification for more than 100 versions. It's a utility airframe with a huge range of missions. Next, dimensions. Years of experience have shown that helicopters of this size and lifting capacity are the most popular around the world. Mi-8's designers have set the standards for helicopters of this class. Third, the power plant. Amongst many features that win the helicopter friends is the automatic engine control system. That looks after the required rotor speed and also synchronizes the engines. If one engine fails, the system automatically increases power on the remaining engine. Flight continues more or less uninterrupted. Even in the early days, there was an automatic pilot. That was a new feature on Soviet helicopters. The designers were keen that the maintenance of the helicopter should be simple. Technicians don't have to use ladders. They get on top of the helicopter through the special hatch in the cockpit. The cargo cabin rear doors have been adapted from the Mi-4 helicopter. They can easily be taken off for loading bulky cargo or for airlift delivery. Of course, there's a continuing process of modernizing and updating, and the design team constantly strives to improve the helicopter's operational performance. June 1965, the new helicopter flies in the important Paris Air Show. along with the Mi-6 and Mi-10 heavy helicopters. Foreign specialists lavish praise on the Mi-8 for its flight performance. They also note that travelling comfort is much improved by low vibration levels inside the cabin. Expert opinion at the 1965 Paris Salon includes the Mi-8 amongst the world's top medium transport helicopters. And Mi-8 goes on to perform at many other international air shows. In fact, it becomes one of those Soviet engineering designs which always attracts the foreign public. As soon as the Mi-8 was built, they started advertising it abroad, and it just flew from one country to another. Test pilot Alfirov covered 35,000 kilometers doing that. That's nearly a round-the-world flight. I've flown all over the Middle East and Europe. I've flown in Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. I've been almost everywhere in Europe. I was an instructor in Syria. I was teaching Syrian pilots to fly the Mi-8. I flew to Cyprus many times as well. The hardest flight I ever did was from Moscow to Delhi in India. Production is continually ramping up. The helicopter is in great demand in the USSR and abroad. People are sometimes wary to start with, but they're always interested in the Mi-8. Another factory, the Ulan-Ude aviation plant, starts building Mi-8s. Civil operators assess the Mi-8 very highly. Compared to the Mi-4, Mi-8 has twice the lifting capacity and it's 1.5 times faster. In fact, overall, it's 3 times as productive as the Mi-4. But the military, well, it took them quite a while to see the advantages of the new helicopter. At first, they only used a couple of dozen for liaison and transport. The background to that was that in 1964, Nikita Khrushchev was removed from power. And in 1966, one of the Mi-8 prototypes crashed and pilot Nikolai Lyoshin and his crew died. So maybe that's why the Soviet army was still using the piston-engined Mi-4 rather than the new Mi-8. That situation changed when war broke out. It was the Vietnam War, one where the US Army made very good use of the new gas turbine helicopters. Those piston-engine helicopters were getting obsolete. Gas turbine helicopters are very efficient. They've got better lifting capacity, better flight range, better reliability. Back in the Soviet Union, they start urgent work on a combat version of the Mi-8. Testing is complete in 1968, and Mi-8 goes into service with the Soviet Army. In the Soviet Union, the Army was the #1 customer. That's why the helicopter designers only got awards when the Mi-8 officially went into military service. As soon as that happened, they got their USSR state awards. So now the Mi-8 has become a real multi-purpose helicopter, capable of performing both civilian and military missions. The Mi-8 multi-purpose military transport helicopter. Main rotor diameter 21.3 meters. Helicopter length 18.2 meters. Power plant 2 TV2-117 gas turbine engines, 1500 shaft horsepower each. Crew 3. Maximum speed 250 kilometers an hour. Maximum takeoff weight 12,000 kilos. Maximum payload 4,000 kilos. Troop capacity 24. Armament, rockets, bombs, anti-tank missiles, guns. Over time, the Soviet Army gradually replaces its Mi-4s with Mi-8s. Pilots who'd flown the Mi-4 for a long time were simply amazed with the new Mi-8. They admired it. They especially liked the new cockpit design, which was much more comfortable. Also, they felt the Mi-8 looked to be elegant and beautiful. But the pilots were dismayed by the amount of selectors and switches on the overhead panels. There were so many of them compared to the old Mi-4. Yes, it took us some time to get used to that, but we were young then and we learned quickly. Young pilots find that familiarity with the new helicopter comes easily. The difference in flying the Mi-4 and Mi-8 is like the difference between driving a big truck and a passenger car. Mi-8 then is a new generation helicopter with enhanced ergonomics and flight characteristics. It also boasts high serviceability. Nevertheless, the Mi-4 is still there. It's in demand in mountainous areas. It's also an anti-submarine aircraft. And in the mid-70s, there isn't yet an anti-submarine version of the Mi-8. From the early 70s, helicopters had become an integral and highly efficient part of the Soviet armed forces. Indeed, there are some jobs that you can only do with helicopters. Helicopter units have many requirements to meet, mobility, for instance. To satisfy these needs, the Mi-8 branches out into many versions, including airborne repair, fuel transport, tanker, airborne hospital versions. In fact, there are nearly 100 versions, and others include mine laying and mine clearance, search and rescue, electronic warfare, reconnaissance, artillery observation, and airborne command post. The biggest civil operator of the Mi-8 helicopter was the Soviet Aeroflot company. Almost every regional center of Aeroflot had helicopters at its disposal. They were especially important in Siberia and the Far East, where there are neither airfields nor a good road network. The Mi-8s delivered supplies to remote villages and to geological exploration crews. The helicopters also became airborne hospitals, as well as flying cranes. The Mi-8 is jack of all trades. Military and civil versions operate from the Baltic to Kamchatka and from the Arctic to the hot deserts of Central Asia. Mi-8's popularity snowballs. Within a very short time, it's in service with socialist and third world countries and even with some capitalist nations. With such big numbers, the Mi-8 is getting cheaper, and a good price, coupled with excellent performance, endears it to many customers. The military versions for foreign customers, though, have less armament than the Soviet Army versions. Export versions are actually the first Mi-8s to take part in conflict. Participating in local wars in the Middle East and in Indochina provides much experience, which later helps the Mil Company designers improve the Mi-8. We've covered the continuous upgrading of the Mi-8, but one particular upgrade is so important that it's worth looking at in more detail. It's the anti-submarine version that we've talked about before. Work on it had started alongside the early Mi-8 development. The technical specifications had been discussed with a customer over years. It was to have an endurance of 2 hours on station at a radius of 230 kilometers from its operating base and to be able to operate off the water when necessary. This helicopter became much heavier than the main version, so much so that new engines had to be developed by the Azotov Design Bureau. To save time, the first tests take place with the original engines. Summer 1967, the Mi-8 is transformed into an anti-submarine helicopter. The helicopter's underside was cut off and replaced with a boat hull shape. It wasn't as easy as it might seem. There was a pressurized section of this hull with an anti-submarine torpedo inside. By the end of 1969, the new engines are ready. They're called TV3117, and they've got 30% more power. Of course, they need new gearboxes and drive shafts as well. The tail rotor is placed on the left side of the tail boom, and that increases the rotor efficiency. It becomes a pusher, and it rotates towards the main rotor downflow. An auxiliary power plant is installed on board the helicopter. It serves as an engine starter and a generator at the same time. As a result, helicopter weight is reduced and the engine start becomes easier. The undercarriage is retractable. The fuel tanks are included within the fuselage. 1971, the modernized anti-submarine version makes its maiden flight. Unfortunately, Mi-8 Mil isn't there to see this helicopter in the sky. The great designer had died at the age of 60 the previous year. But his work continues. The anti-submarine helicopter goes into service in 1974. It's designated Mil Mi-14. The same design concept goes into the modernized version Mi-8 MT, and the export version is better known as the Mi-17. That was developed in 1975, and it's still in great demand both in Russia and abroad. The Mi-17 has the same engines as the Mi-14, with the same main gearbox, tail rotor, and auxiliary power plant. The TV3-117 engines are very reliable at high altitudes and temperatures. With its improved flight performance, the Mi-17 replaces the Mi-4 in the mountains and hot climate regions. The Mi-17 gets its first foreign public demonstration at the Paris Air Show in 1981. Aviation specialists evince much interest. Currently, the Mi-17 is in production at Kazan and Ulan-Ude factories. Next step for the Mil Design Bureau is to improve the Mi-8 MT flight performance. Here's one of the updated versions. The fuel tanks are now under the cargo cabin floor. The fuselage is 1 meter longer. There's a new sliding door on the right for cargo loading and airborne delivery. This highly uprated mark is the Mi-18. It first flew in April 1984. But it never made it into mass production. Political changes in the Soviet Union in the mid-80s stopped all Mi-18 development, and the project ground to a halt. Efforts were now refocused on the development of the new generation Mi-38 helicopter. All these events were unfolding against the background of an Afghan war, a war that became a real test for Mi-8 helicopters. They had to satisfy all the different needs of the war zone. It was that Afghan war that produced a new vision of the legendary Mi-8.